Okay, so good morning. Today's daf is Bava Kamma daf Peichet. We are at the two dots at the top of daf Peichet, just as a refresher of what we've been doing. So we learned a Mishnah yesterday. We saw the following debate. The Tana Kamma says that if one wounds a non-Jewish slave who belongs to someone else, one is going to be liable for all five categories of payment. Frankly, that's probably the more logical approach. Indeed, we'll see that the Gemara is not even going to challenge that approach. And that's because you're damaging a human being. And so as a result, all the different forms of damage seem to apply, even if the person is in fact a slave. But the bottom line is, and so as a result, you would pay all five: damage, pain, healing, unemployment, and embarrassment. Rabbi Yehuda says, however, that there's no obligation to pay compensation for embarrassment. So as we pick up on that fourth line, with the quote from our Mishnah, we're going to be asking why, we're going to quote the Tana Kamma, but we're going to ask about Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. So, Hachovel Eved Kanani Shalach Erim Chayev. We said that if you wound a non-Jewish slave of somebody else, so you're going to be liable. And Rabbi Yehuda adds that there's no liability for embarrassment. So the Gemara asks, my time at the Rabbi Yehuda, what's the reasoning of Rabbi Yehuda? Why does he say that there's no liability for embarrassing somebody, for embarrassing a slave? So Amar Kra Kiyanatsu Anashim Yachdav Ish V'Achiv. Well, the pasuk that is the underlying pasuk for the concept of embarrassment talks about where two men are fighting, Ish V'Achiv, a man and his brother, and then it continues to say, and then the wife of one of them grabs the private parts of the other, thereby embarrassing. And we're going to see that there was liability for that. But the key here is this word achiv, the brother. So b'misha yeshlo achva, the only time you're going to be liable for embarrassing somebody is when that person is considered your brother. Yatsa eved she'ein lo achva. So it comes to exclude a slave that does not have the concept of brotherhood with him. So, all right, well, that's okay. So I understand your explanation, Rabbanan. What about the rabbis? Why, what do they say? Meaning, how could they understand? Why don't they understand the psukim the same way and say that brother means non-slave? No, they are brothers. You're focusing on the full body, on the nature of their freedom, but they and that may be true, but they're brothers in other respects. Specifically, both even non-Jewish slaves are subject to the mitzvot. Indeed, they're subject to the same mitzvot that women are subject to. So the bottom line is that they are, there's a concept of them being covered. So now what we're going to do for the next few minutes is go back and forth and say, well, we've seen that Rabbi Yehuda takes a position that brothers exclude slaves, and the rabbis take the position that brothers include slaves. So let's take a look and see in other areas of halacha what the ramifications would be and whether they raise any problems. So Elamiyatul Rabbi Yehuda, Zomame Eved Lo Yaharogu. According to Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the word brother excludes slaves, so then we have, when in connection with Edim Zomamin, what does it say? Diksiv asisem lo kasher zamam lasos lachiv. That when we're supposed to punish the Edim Zomamin, the false witnesses who were testified to being somewhere else at the time, so they couldn't have possibly been witnesses to the action that to which they testified in court. And we say that you do to them what they wanted to do to their brother. So here again we have brother. That seems to suggest that we should not have to subject any kind of witnesses who testify falsely about a slave killing somebody, for example. You wouldn't have to kill them. And Tosfos points out the opposite side of that. If we take a look at the second Tosfos at the top, Pechet Amud Aleph, Zomei Ebed Lo Yaharogu, V'cheben Dehem Lo Yaharogu. And since you're not going to kill the Edom Zomamin, Gam ha'eved lo yareg, and so to the slave himself shouldn't be killed. Because we saw over the last few weeks that if in fact you have testimony that cannot be considered zomamin because for whatever reason, yeah, whether it's because of the nature of the witness or the nature of the uh, 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 accused. So either way, then you're not going to have, there's not going to be Adam Zomerman, and therefore that situation can't, you can't end up killing anybody in that situation. And so Tosos points that out, that according to our question, according to the Havamina, we would also have to say that there wouldn't be any way to kill the slave who killed somebody. And of course, we don't want to say that. So Amar Rava, Amar Rosheshis, Amar Kra, Uviarta Hara Mikirbecha. Mikol Makom. So Rabbi Yehuda would tell you, according to Rava, who is quoting Rav Sheshes, that the reason that you actually do the punishment to them is because although it does say brother, it also says Ubiyarta Haram Mikirbecha, you should destroy the evil from amongst your midst. So as a result, therefore, it does, and that implies that whoever the Zomimim are, even if they're not a brother, even if they testified against somebody who's not a brother. So as a result, that shows that in fact, the question we don't need to worry about. So now we go back and we ask about the rabbis. Again, the rabbis say that brother now includes slaves. So Rabbanan Eved Yehe Kasher Lamalchus. If that's true, well, then we should allow even a slave, or presumably a former slave, but a slave to be the king of Israel. Because what does the pasuk say? The pasuk says that you should appoint a king mikarabachecha from amongst your brothers. So again, there we have the reference to brothers. Brothers include slaves, according to the rabbi. So slave could be a king. So Amre, they answered, Ulatamech tishalach ger b'devrei. We should ask that same question about a convert according to everybody, because a convert, everybody agrees, is considered a brother. Now, here, when we say convert, Rashi explains 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, I guess it's 3 lines into the narrow lines of Rashi at the end of the line. Tikshe lech ger, shaledato v'horato b'kedusha. We're talking about actually the child of a female convert whose birth is completely in holiness, meaning the mother became pregnant after she converted. So even according to Rebbe Yehuda, Yeshlo Achva, everybody agrees that this child of the convert is considered a brother, but Upasul Malchus, we say that he's not allowed to be king. Shoter, and can't even be an officer, Ba'alma, of a right, in the rest of the category, meaning, in other situations. So Elohim Cain, Imo Yisrael, you need to have the mother be Jewish. But Parakachol, be Yavamos, as we saw in Maseches Yavamos. So the point is that this shows that everybody would say that a convert, especially the child of a female convert, is considered a brother. And yet we say that this is a brother who cannot be king. So this is a problem both according to the rabbis and according to Rabbi Yehuda. So Ella Amar Kra Mikarabachecha. No, you have to understand that the point is that the pasuk says Mikarabachecha, from amongst your brothers. So Mimuvchar Shebeachecha, you have to choose from the best of your brothers. So obviously that does not include a slave, and it would not include a convert.
But the mother is Jewish. The
What?
mother converted. She is Jewish.
100%, but she's not Jewish from birth, and so as a result, even though she's not Jewish from birth, even though she did convert, her son still remains subject to these limitations according to Rashi. Now, it's not clear that we actually paskin this way. I think that the child of a convert, I think we don't. I'm not sure that we actually paskin this way. Again, I'm not 100% sure, but the bottom line is that's certainly the way Rashi's understanding it. That we're talking about the child of a convert. I mean, because it's interesting that Rashi chose to interpret it this way, because you could have said that the natural interpretation would be the convert himself, that we're talking about a man who converts, and we say that he can't do it. But Rashi specifically seems to be saying that even the son of a woman who converts is not capable of taking a leadership position.
They make more sense, perhaps then, if the woman converted while she was pregnant. Maybe that's
Correct.
easier. But here she was converted before she even got pregnant.
Correct. That's exactly right. Rashi says it's even before she became pregnant, only after she converted. So you're absolutely right that it's a complicated question as to how that could be the case. Okay, so we're continuing on in this discussion of how the rabbis and Rabbi Yehuda could understand achecha as either including or excluding a slave. So again, we're going to focus now on the rabbis including a slave in the term achecha, because elamiyata l'rabbanan yehi eved kasher la'edus. Shouldn't a slave be able to testify? Diksiv v'hinei eid sheker ha'eid sheker anav achiv. When it says that, behold, the witness is a false witness because he's testified falsely against his brother. So that suggests that who's allowed to testify? A brother, meaning even a slave, according to the rabbis. So Amar Ula explains, Eidus lo matzis amrat. No, you can't say that a slave is able to give testimony. Asya Eidus b'kal v'chomer mi'isha, because you have a kal v'chomer from the category of a woman, because uma isha shehi ru'uya lavo bakal, a woman is allowed to marry anybody within the Jewish people, psula edus, and yet she's not able to testify. Eved she'ena ro'i lavo bakal, a slave who's not able to marry anybody in the Jewish people. Eno din shepasul betlaedus, shouldn't it certainly be true that that person would be puzzle to testify? So no. So mala isha, how can you compare a woman to a slave? Shekain aina ru'uya lamila. A woman isn't subject to mila. So tomer be'ebed shehu roi mila. So and now you're going to tell me that you're going to make some kind of comparison to a slave that is subject to mila. Maybe the fact that there's mila is what enables would enable a slave to testify. So katan yechiach. No, that doesn't work, because katan disproves that circumcision can have anything to do with whether or not somebody can testify. Because a katan sheyesh no b'mila, they are subject, of course, to mila. You have to a child as low as like 8 days is subject to mila. Upasal edus, and yet they're not allowed to testify. So that shows that maybe we can basically combine that your counter to the Kal V'chomer does not, in fact, undermine the Kal V'chomer, because that effort to undermine the Kal V'chomer is totally irrelevant. So Mala Katan She'enu b'mitzvos Tomar be'eved shehu b'mitzvos. Well, 1 second. You wanted to use a katan to undermine the fact that Mila doesn't, and say that Mila doesn't matter, but maybe it's not about the Mila that doesn't matter. Maybe it's about, for the katan, it's about the absence of mitzvos that matters. And therefore, with no being not subject to any mitzvos d'oraisa, so then maybe that means that that's why a minor cannot testify. Tomar be'eved shehu b'mitzvos. Can you say the same thing about a slave who is subject to mitzvahs? No. Well, okay, but isha tochiach. Well, now we have the possibility to show that a woman points out the issue, because she yeshna mitzvahs upsula le'edus. So it can't be that being subject to mitzvahs is what enables you to testify. So we've now shown that it can't be about the mitzvahs and it can't be about the milah. So b'chazar adin, and so the argument repeats itself. Basic lo raizeh k'raizeh. Basically, the nature of this one's not like that one. Lo raizeh k'raizeh, and the nature of that one's not like this one. So meaning children and women each have a unique aspect that is stronger and a unique aspect that's weaker. So, but what's the tzad shavish behen? What do they have that's in common? Shekain einim b'chol hamitzvos. They're not subject to all mitzvos, and yet upsulim lahayid, and they're unfit to testify. So afani avia as ha'avid. So I'll too also bring a slave she'einim b'chol mitzvos upasul lahayid. So as a result, shouldn't we learn from a woman and a minor that even a slave will not be able to testify, because just like the woman and the minor there's no subject to all the mitzvos, and there's no and they're unfit to testify. So too, the slave should be is not subject to all the mitzvos and should be unfit to testify. So malat shekain eno ish. Wait 1 second. There's a problem because when you look at the minor and the woman, well, that you could say that there is another characteristic that's common to both of them, and that's that they're not an adult man. Tomar be'eved shehu ish, and yet you can't say that by a slave. That is an adult man. So we're going to try again. Ella, apologies for not scrolling. Ella Tate Migazlan. So, all right, so let's try and learn. So now we've tried this effort that began with Ula saying that we're going to learn from a woman. It didn't work. Now we're going to try to learn instead from a robber. Malagaz. And the point is that and Rashi tells us what the teaching is because it doesn't explain. The Gemara doesn't go on to explain it. So it's about 20 lines down in Rashi. Migazlan deroy lavo bekahal. Right, a gazlan is totally fit to marry somebody in the Jewish people, and yet upasal edus, he's not able to testify. Diksiv al tashas yadcha begomer kilomer al tashas resha dechamas aid. Don't allow a wicked person who engages in a robbery to serve as a witness. So the problem is malagazlan shekain ma'asav garmulo. But the problem is that when it comes to a robber, it's his actions that cause him to be disqualified. Tomer be'evid she'ein ma'asav garmulo. How can you learn a kal v'chomer to a slave who didn't do anything wrong? Slave didn't do anything wrong. So ella teise migazlan umechad mahanach. So we finish Ula's teaching by saying, here's the story. In the end, we're going to prove from a robber along with either a woman or a minor. Because by adding the woman or the minor, so now we've added somebody who does not have an ability who didn't do anything wrong. So as a result, we have two qualities. We have the fact that the person is an adult male and yet cannot testify, and we have a person who is a minor or a woman and cannot testify. And the tzadashava shebehen, that in each of those cases they are able to come into the community and yet they cannot testify. And so too. So as a result, a slave who cannot come into the community should also not be able to testify. And any of our challenges will be undermined by the existence of either the slave, either the robber or the woman/minor. Because if you focus on the actions, well, the minor and the woman don't have any actions that were wrong. And if you focus on the fact that it's an adult male, well, there's the robber who's an adult male. And if you focus on whether or not you can do a bris, so then either the robber or the child will tell you. So the bottom line is that all of the different challenges get resolved by focusing on the robber and either the woman or the minor. And so as a result, that's how we're going to be able to learn it. As Rashi says, the next Rashi, the thing that makes them similar is she'enim zehirim b'chol mitzvos, that they're not covered by all mitzvos. Zeb mipnei risho, the robber because of his wickedness, the zeb mipnei shalon tztava, and the other because they're not fully commanded, and yet they're not subject to being able to testify, and so too a slave who is not subject to all the mitzvot will also not be allowed to testify. Okay, so that was effort number one to do it. We've successfully done it, and so we've come up with a third effort, three times the charm, and we worked it out. But Marbereh the Ravina offers another different possibility. So what does he say? Marbereh the Ravina Amar Kra Lo Yumsu Avos Albanim. a father should not die on as a result of the son, namely that you shouldn't put him to death. Now, ordinarily, we read this to mean that relatives are not allowed to testify, but we're going to say that that's not the only lesson. Lo yumsu al pi avot she'en lahem chayis banim. That what we're going to reread this almost as if it said, "Fathers shall not put to death because of sons." That an aspect of their um, genealogy will actually trigger the fact that they're not going to be able to testify. So what does that mean? That we're not going to accept the testimony of a father who has no relationship, who has no genealogical relationship with his son. And namely, who is that? That's a slave. A slave is not considered, the child of a slave is not considered to have any special connection to the father. Because if you were to just tell me that all we're teaching here is what we learn over there in Sanhedrin, that namely that you're not allowed to testify against a relative, or specifically a son's not allowed to testify against his father. Well, lo yimsu avos albanim. We should say that rather than saying that what the Torah actually says, father shall not be put to death because of sons. But we should say be'edus banim, namely that the testimony of sons. Lichtov rachmana lo yumsu avot al b'neihem. Why doesn't the Torah just say it in a little shorter version that the fathers should not be put as a result of their sons? My banim. Why does it say sons and not b'neihem, their sons? So Shma Minada lo yumsu al pi avot she'en lahem chayis banim. The point is that it's a more general statement that is teaching that if there is no genealogical relationship between the father and the son, so then that person is not able to testify against anybody to put them to death. So Elamayata, well, 1 second. What about the end of the verse? Because the end of the verse says, Ubanim lo yumsu alavot, that sons won't be put together based on fathers. So Hakinami, if you're going to tell me that the first part of the verse is talking about genealogical relationship, so then what we should say about the last part is Lo yumsu al pi banim she'en lehem chayas avos, that we should not put to death through the testimony of a son who has no genealogical relationship to his father. And who is that talking about? That would be somebody who converts to Judaism, because a convert to Judaism effectively no longer is related to their father and mother. Elager hachinami de puzzle to edus. So you're going to tell me that a convert's not allowed to testify? That's not true. A convert is allowed to testify. So Amri Hachi Hashta. 1 second. Are you comparing the two? They're not comparable, because Ger Nihida Ein Lo Chayas Lamalo Lamata Yesh Lo Chayas. Yes, it's true that a convert has no genealogical relationship with his parents, but he does have a genealogical relationship with his children. But that comes to exclude a slave. But that's different from a slave who has no relationship either with a father or with a parent or with a child. Because if you're going to tell me that in fact a convert is not able to testify, here's what the Torah should have said. We should have said in the first part of the verse that fathers should not be put to death based on their sons. And then lo yumsu be'edus banim, and that would tell us that you can't testify against relatives. V'niktov rachmana uvanim lo yumsu alavot. And then let the Torah tell us the wording that actually is in the pasuk, that sons should not be put to death based on fathers. And then because we would have learned, because of this revised wording in the second half of the pasuk, the shmat minat trey, we would learn two things. One is that a father can't testify against his son. You would also learn the fact that you can't be put to death based on the testimony of somebody who has no genealogical relationship to the parents. So and that meaning, who would that be? That would be a convert. The evet nafkale b'kal v'chomer megir. And once we learn that a convert can't testify, we would know for sure that a a slave can't testify because umager dilamalahu de'en lo chayis avalamata yesh lo chayis. Because when it comes to a convert, he may not have a genealogical relationship with his parents, but he has a genealogical relationship with his children. So, and yet, pastor le'edus, again, in this counterfactual, he would be disqualified from testimony. So, when it comes to a slave who has no relationship with parents or children, well, then he should certainly be disqualified to testify. So the fact that we have outlined a method by which the Torah could have easily told us, the fact that taught us the lesson that both a convert and a slave. So now, because of Rahmana lo yumsu avot al banim, because the first part of this verse told us about fathers not being put to death because of sons, and it used al banim and not al b'neihem, then as a result, that's why we're going to say that it must be that it's only slaves that we're not going to say can testify. Because the first part of the pasuk is telling us that we're talking about people who have no genealogical relationship to their children, and that only refers to slaves. So Shema Mina, Evet she'en lo chayas, lo lamala v'lo lamata, hu de pasal edus. It's only a slave who has no relationship with either parents or children that is going to not be allowed to testify. Aval ger kevan diyesh lo chayas lamata kasher le'edus. But it's slave who can have a genealogical relationship with his children, so then he can testify. And if you ask the question, 1 second, why in the second part of the pasuk do we use the broader language of of lo yumsu avot al banim? Why not say al avoseihem, and therefore have it be the specific language that only tells us about fathers not being able to testify against children?
Not being put to death. Not being put to death.
Yes, put to death against because of the testimony of their fathers. So lama lida kasav rafmana ubanim lo yumsu alavot. So why instead did we in fact write that the children should not be put to death based on their fathers? So demashma lo yumsu al pi banim she'en lahem chayas avot, which we have said based on the first part of the verse implies that there's a problem with testimony when there's no genealogical relationship between the son and the father. So Aidi de kasav lo yumsu avot abanim kasav banami uvanim lo yumsu avot. No, the reason that we allow it, that we teach it in that direction, is because of the first part of the verse. We basically, the explanation for why we didn't choose on some level a better, more accurate teaching in the second part of the verse is because we wanted to create a parallel language between the first part of the verse and the second part of the verse. Okay, so that concludes our teaching. And again, basically, we've said that we had this debate between Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanna Kamma about whether or not a slave is subject to embarrassment. Rabbi Yehuda learns it from a pasuk, and then we spent the rest of this time, the rest of the Amud Aleph, figuring out what the ramifications of that disagreement are, or whether there are any ramifications of this disagreement in other areas where we use the language of brotherhood as well to say whether or not slaves should or should not be included. In the end, the bottom line is that effectively we've limited this debate to our own case, and the debate does not extend to other places. We were unable to find anywhere else where we would try to extend the debate because we were able to find explanations that would undermine trying to extend the debate. All right, so now we go back to our Mishnah, and although we're going to go back to our Mishnah, really what follows is really I'm still not sure. I have not been able to figure out why this is right here. The best that I can figure out is that we did just mention the first person who answered the question above was Ula, and we're going to eventually. I'm sorry. No. I'm getting myself confused. Never mind. That was not. So I don't. Again, I don't know why we're going to talk about this story. It does not seem to be directly related to either the piece of Mishnah that we're quoting or other pieces of Mishnah. But maybe it just has to do with property rights and lack of symmetry. But let's take a look and you'll see what I'm talking about. So son ra, that basically if you run into a deaf mute person, a person who is insane, or a minor, you're going to be in bad shape, because you're going to be liable for anything that you do to them, but they're not going to be liable for anything that happens to you. So Ime de Rav Shmuel. So now we're going to have a story. Ime de Rav Shmuel bar Abba Mahagronia. So Rav Shmuel bar Abba's mother, who is from Hagronia, Havas Nasiva le Rabbi Abba, was married to Rabbi Abba. Now, some people say that this Rabbi Abba is the same Abba of Rav Shmuel bar Abba. Some people say that no, this was a different Rabbi Abba, that it just so happened that both of the woman's husbands were both named Rabbi Abba. But in any event, Shmuel bar Abba bra. So she wrote all of her property, and the property that we're talking about is nichse malog. If we take a look at Rashi, Rashi even incorporates the fact that we're talking about nichse malog into the language that of the Gemara. Kisavsinu lenichse malog. After she married Rabbi Abba, Basar Deshkiva Azal Rav Shmuel. So after she dies, right? So now Basar Deshkiva, after she dies, as we turn to Hechem Abed, Azal Rav Shmuel bar Abba, Kamei to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. So he went to Rabbi Yirmi bar Abba, whether it's his full brother or half brother, doesn't really matter. But the bottom line is he went to this other, maybe it's his stepbrother even, and Leukme Benichse, in order to, and Rabbi Yirmi bar Abba said, yes, in fact, you, Shmuel bar Abba, are the rightful owner of this property. I didn't really go through the introduction here, I realize. So let me go back through the introduction to remind us of the concepts of nichse malog, nichse tzon barzel, and I'll also highlight a debate that the Gemara is going to touch on. So first, what are these two categories of property? When a woman comes into a marriage, she can bring two different kinds of categories of property into the marriage. One is where what we'll call nichse tzon barzel. That's where effectively the husband guarantees a certain value back to the wife. And so as a result, the husband effectively has full ownership. He can do whatever he wants with the property because he's basically promised to give back to her the money that the property is worth. Now, if in fact the property still exists, he's going to give back the property too. But really, this is effectively like he's purchasing the property from her at the very beginning with a commitment where he's borrowing the money essentially until the end of the marriage. And that amount of money is going to be listed in the ketubah. And in fact, we effectively equalize that for every woman today. But in any event, the bottom line is that's nichse tzon barzel. Then there's other property, and that's what property that we're talking about here, nichse malug, and that's property where the husband has the right to receive the fruit from the property, meaning the easy way is to think about real property where he would plant it and the fruit belongs to him, but he doesn't have the ability to sell it because at the end of the marriage, that real property is going to go back to the wife. And if the property goes up in value, the wife gets the higher value. If the property goes down in value, the wife suffers the lower value. Either way, it goes with the market forces. And this property is not mentioned in the ketubah. It's just because it's effectively hers throughout the marriage because she is the owner of the underlying property. So now that we've said all that, there's going to be a distinction about whether or not owning the underlying property is what matters in terms of the right to sell something, or owning the fruit of the property is what matters in order to have the right to sell somebody. Rabbi Yochanan is going to say that the person who owns the fruit of the property, namely in this case the husband with respect to nechse malog, he's the true owner, and so as a result, the wife has no ability to sell the underlying property. While Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says no, the person who owns the rights to the fruit is the real underlying owner. I'm sorry, I got it the reverse. Rabbi Yochanan's the one who says that the person who owns the rights to the fruit is the true owner, and Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says no, the person who has the rights to the underlying property. So Rabbi Yochanan would say again that the husband is effectively the true owner of nechse malog, while Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish would say that no, the wife is the true owner of nechse malog, and we'll see that debate as we go through. So let's take a look and we'll continue. So now again, back into the Gemara, we're at the third line. Azu Rabbi Abba. So now Rabbi Abba, who is married, who is the widower of Rav Shmuel bar Abba's mother. So Rabbi Abba is upset about this because he thought he was going to inherit this property. So Amra Lamilsa Kamei de Rav Hoshia. So he went to Rav Hoshia. Azar Rav Hoshia, Amra Kamei de Rav Yehuda. And Rav Hoshia went and taught this over to Rav Yehuda. Amra Le, and Rav Yehuda said, Hachi Amar Shmuel. Here's what Shmuel taught on this. Ha'isha shemachra b'nichse malog b'chaye bala umesa. That if a woman sold nichse malog property during the lifetime of her husband, and then she died, habal motzi miyad halakochos. The husband gets to take the property away from the purchasers. And so as a result, Rabbi Abba is able to prevent Rabbi Shmuel bar Abba from taking possession of the property because, unfortunately for Rav Shmuel bar Abba, his mom predeceased her husband. And so as a result, the husband inherits, and the property which she had tried to convey to her son does not go to her son, but rather goes to her husband. So Amrua Kamei de Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba. So this was taught in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, meaning they went back to Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, because remember, Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba was the one who said that Rabbi Shmuel bar Abba could keep the property. So Amr Lahu, Anamasnisi Yadana. Look, I don't know what you're talking about with this teaching of Shmuel, but I can tell you that I've got a Mishnah that certainly seems to be consistent with what I say. Ditnan. That if you write property for your son for after the owner's death, so the father's death, so la'akramoso, that second line in Rashi on Pechetam Bet, mehayom ula'akramoso, that he writes it as if it was from today, and then it takes effect after death, because shaguf kanoi leben. The idea here is that the underlying property, let's call, the real property, is going to now go to the son. Mihayom, from today. Ela sha'av ochel ha'peiros ad yom moso. But the father is holding on to the fruit of the property, meaning that he's going to continue to be responsible for planting and getting the benefit of those plants. So haben so now that we have this father, we'll call the father Frank and the son Sam. So Father Frank wrote off his real estate property to his son Sam, and now neither Frank nor Sam have the ability to sell the entire property because the father can't sell it because he wrote it over to the son. And the son can't sell it because the father retained the fruit rights. So machar ha'av, what happens if the father did sell it? Mechurim ad sheyamos, all he can sell is the fruit rights, and so as a result, those are going to be sold until he dies. Machar haben, if the son sells it, ein lo lokeach ad sheyomas ha'av, then the buyer gets nothing until the father dies. And what's the implication here? Ki mayas av miha. That the implication is that when the father dies, the buyer from the son Sam does get to keep the property. He gets the entire property. Well, and Islay Lokeach, and it will belong to the buyer. Avagav demes haben b'chayayav, and that implies that that's true even if the son dies during the father's lifetime. So here, now by analogy, delo asuli de'aben, even though the fruit rights never came into the possession of the son. So again, let's go through Rabbi Yirmiyah's logic. Rabbi Yirmiyah's logic is the following: just as this son has the ability to transfer the property that he never had the fruit rights to a buyer, so too Rav Shmuel Bar Abba's mother, who never had the fruit rights to the property because they were held by the husband, she has the right to transfer that property to her son Rav Shmuel. So isn't that a good analogy? But we have to qualify all of that we're going to be understanding the Mishnah that we just quoted, and this Mishnah was from Bava Basra, Daf Kuf Lamed Vav. That this Mishnah we are saying Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. We're interpreting it like Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. The Amar Lo Shna Mesa Ben B'Chayei Av De Lo Asul Lidei Ben Lo Shna Mesa Av B'Chayei Ben De Asul Lidei Ben Kana Lokeach. That according to Rabbi Shimon Lakish, it doesn't matter whether the father dies first or the son dies first. Either way, the son has the ability to sell his rights to the property, because what matters to Reish Lakish is, does he own the underlying property? The fruit rights are not the main aspect of the property. De Idmar Machara ben B'Chayei Av Umesa ben B'Chayei Av Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lo Kana Lokeach Reish Lakish Amar Kana Lokeach, because there's this debate between Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says that if the son dies during the father's lifetime, the buyer doesn't get anything because the son never acquired the fruit rights. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, it is the fruit rights that enable the son to make any sale a valid sale. Whereas Reish Lakish says, no, what matters is the underlying property rights that is what enables the son to have a sale, and therefore it doesn't make a difference whether the son dies first or the father dies first. The sale is a valid sale. And again, Rabbi Yochanan Amar Lo Kana Lokeach, now explaining it, Rabbi Yochanan tells you that the buyer from the son, Sam, is not going to be able to buy it because Amar Lach, Rabbi Yochanan would explain, Ki Katani Masnisin, when our Mishnah said, right? We quoted the Mishnah that said that when the son sells the property, Ein lo lokeach ad sheyamos habab, the buyer has nothing until the father dies. So that's where Machar ben lo kana lokeach ad sheyamos habab ha'av. That's v'chimeis ha'av islay lokeach. It's when did the Mishnah teach us this? This is that the buyer gets it when the father dies. That's talking about where the son was still alive when the father died, and therefore the fruit rights came to the son, and so as a result, that's why his sale turns out to be a valid sale. But if the son had died during the lifetime of the father, where the fruit rights never made it to the son, so when the father eventually dies, the buyer doesn't get them because kinyan peiros kinyan haguf, that the ownership rights of the produce, that's the real rights to the property, and as a result, unless you have that, you can't sell it. And so when the son sold it, even though he sold a right, he sold it as a contingent right, and it was contingent on his surviving his father. And whereas Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Omer Kana Lokeach, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish disagrees, and he says no, the buyer acquires it from the son Sam, even if son Sam dies before the father, because before Frank. Ki katani masnizin makar haben ein lokeach ad sheyamos ha'av ki mayas av mias islay lokeach. That when we have in this Mishnah, it's talking about that when the buyer doesn't have anything until the father dies, we're saying that even if the father dies, no matter what, the buyer acquires it. Lo shna lo meis haben b'chayei av. It doesn't make a difference whether the son did not die during the lifetime of the father. The asuli de ben, so the fruit rights go into the hands of the son. Lo shna meis haben b'chayei av. The lo asuli de ben. And it doesn't make a difference if the son dies first, where the fruit rights never made it to the son. In each of those cases, kana lokeach, the buyer did make the acquisition. Almaka Sabar Kinyan Paris Lavka Kinyan Aguftami. So we see that according to Reish Lakish, owning the fruit rights is not like owning the underlying property. That's not the most important buyer. The Kikazabin, and so as a result, when the son sells the underlying property that he is holding, Dide Kazabin, he's selling something that he already owns. Va'anan hashta, and so now in our situation, Bain Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, Bain Rabbi Yehuda, to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Firalahu. Everybody is seeming to agree with Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, and so as a result, that Mishnah seemed that the Mishnah applies during even if the son died during his father's lifetime, and so now we have a problem for Rabbi Yehuda. And Vikama Rabbi Yirmiyah bar Abba, and so Rabbi Yirmiyah is saying back to Rabbi Yehuda as to why he was saying, why did Rabbi Yirmiyah say that Rav Shmuel bar Abba gets to keep the property? Because Isal Kadaita Kinyan Paris Kinyan Guf Dami. Because if you were to say that really the ownership of the fruit rights is like ownership of the main property, then in that Mishnah, Kimayis Av Umayis Haben B'Chayei Ha'av. When the father dies and the son had already died during the father's lifetime, amai isle lokeach. Why should the buyer get it? Ki kazabin hai. When the son was selling it, lavdi de kazabin. It wasn't his. Elalav shramina kinyan peris lavki kinyan aguftami. This shows that owning the fruit is not like owning the underlying property. And so as a result, the fact that the husband has the fruit rights according to the milog property, does not prevent the wife from transferring that property to Rav Shmuel bar Abba. So Adrua lekamei de Rav Yehuda. So they went back to Rav Yehuda and explained the argument that Rabbi Yirmiyah was making. So Amar Lahu, and he explained back to them, no, Haki Amar Shmuel. This is what Shmuel said. Zo ein adoma lemishnah seinu. That case of the Mishnah is not comparable to our case of the mother and Rav Shmuel bar Abba. Well, why not? My time. Why isn't it comparable? So Rav Yosef is going to give the first effort at trying to answer this. We're going to reject that answer, and then Abaye will give a second approach. So Amar Rav Yosef, Bishlama, Itani Ibcha. It would have made sense if we learned it the other direction. Hakosav Nechasav La'aviv, Ika Lamishpat, Mina, Dekinyan, Peres, Lav, Kikinyan, Aguftami. That when we had that Mishnah, where it said that the father is writing the possessions to his son, if instead we said that it was the son writing to the father, then we would have a good proof. Because Elahashta, the Katani Kosav Nechasav, no, here, who is it that the father is writing it to? He's writing the possessions over to his son. Maybe Mishum Derai Yorshavhu. Maybe because the son is one of the people who is going to inherit his father, maybe that's why we're going to give the son the ability to sell the property. So Amrle Abaye, 1 second, that doesn't make sense. Atu bra yaris abba, abba lo yaris bra. 1 second. Are you telling me that a son inherits a father, but a father doesn't inherit a son? Of course, it goes in both directions in certain circumstances. Sometimes a father will inherit a son. El avruchinhu lenichse mibrei kaas. Oh, so we're going to say, maybe you're going to qualify your statement and say that the son was trying to keep by giving the property, by saying that we wanted the Mishnah to talk about the reverse case of a father giving to of a son giving to the father. It's in order to avoid the son giving the property, having his own son, the grandson, inherit the property. Maybe our Mishnah, the Mishnah as it's currently written, is talking about where a father is trying to keep the possessions away from the brothers of the son that he sold it to, that he transferred it to. So the bottom line is that your explanation, Rav Yosef, doesn't work, because there could be, we could say in any situation that it's a special, that this is a unique category, and we should learn the lesson from the Mishnah. So why is that Mishnah not comparable? Because Mishum Takanas Usha, that the whole thing is about Takanas Usha, and Takanas Usha is what makes the case of Rav Shmuel bar Abba's case different, because the Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina The Usha Hiskinu, they made an enactment in Usha that said, Ha'isha Shamakra Benichse Malog B'chai Bala Umesa, that if a woman sells her Malog property while her husband is still alive, and then she dies first, Habal Motzi Miyad Halakochos, the husband is allowed to take it away from the purchasers. And that's the case that of Rav Shmuel Bar Abba. And that is why, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Abba gets to block his wife's gift to her son, Rav Shmuel Bar Abba. And so, as a result, that's the story. But now, Amar Rav Idi Bar Avin, Rav Idi Bar Avin says, and we'll conclude with this: Av Ananami Tanina. Maybe we could say that we could see the enactment of Usha in the following brisa. Me'idin anu be'ish ploni shegerish ish tovanasan ksubasa. If the two witnesses testify that a certain person has divorced his wife and he paid for her ksuba, but it turns out that they're going to be false witnesses as we turn to pay Ted Amud Aleph, v'harihi taktav, and yet it seems like she is still serving him, is underneath him, meaning that she's still his wife, umashamash to, and she's serving him, v'nimtzu zomamin, and then it turns out that these witnesses are Adam Zomamin. Ain omrim yishalmu kol ksubasa. We don't have her pay. We don't have these witnesses pay to her the entire ksuba, because what were they trying to do? They were trying to effectively, right here, this wife Wilma, who's married to her husband Hugh, was trying to would at some point in the future like to collect her ksuba. And what they're saying is that she's already collected her ksuba, so she's not entitled to it. So they are preventing her from the eventual collection of her ksuba. But it's not the full ksuba that are preventing her. Ela tovas hana ksubasa. It's only the sort of the discounted value, the value today of the hana of the ksuba, because that we need to that she would get, because Ezehu tovas hanas ksubasa, and how much is that benefit? Omdin Kamma Adam Rotza Litain Biksuba Shalzo. How much somebody would pay for it? She'im Nis Armala Onis Garsha, because she only gets the ksuba if she's widowed or divorced. The Imesa Yerashena Bala, because if she dies first, then her husband inherits her. So doesn't this show, and we're going to explain it in a moment, doesn't this show that that the Takanas Usha is incorporated in this? Because if, in fact, there was no such thing as Takanas Usha, why does the husband get to inherit her completely? Tezabin Ksuba Salagamri. Let her sell the Nichse Tzon Barzel that is written in the Ksuba, because that's property that she's supposed to get no matter what. And that's maybe that's the property that we should allow her to sell. So as a result, Takanas Usha is what prevents her from being able to sell that. So Amar Abaye, no. Im Amru b'nichse milog. When we talk about the Takanas Usha, it is only about a milog property. Yomru b'nichse tzon barzel. Did they say it with respect to nichse tzon barzel? No. Nichse tzon barzel, she never had the right to sell in the first place. And so as a result, that always goes to the husband, because the husband effectively owns that. But Nichse Malog, she did have the right to sell, because, as we understood, according to Reish Lakish, the owner of the underlying property and not the owner of the fruit is what matters. All right, well, now that we've touched on this concept of discounting the value of the ksuba, we're going to talk a little bit more about that topic. But for that discussion, you'll need to stay tuned for tomorrow's daf.
Is the comparison of the son that with the father valid to the discussion of the woman inheriting? Because if the son automatically inherits the father, does the son inherit the wife if she dies?
Correct. No, you're right that there's that lack of comparison, but that's why Abaye's response to Rav Yosef was crucial. Abaye's response was that it is not about the right to inheritance, because if it was the right to inheritance, what about the other brothers? The other brothers are also being excluded from this inheritance when the father writes it over to the son. And so it can't just be that the father has some right to that the son has some right of inheritance to the property, because of course a woman does have some rights of inheritance to her husband's property. If the husband dies first, she's taken care of, and has first access to some of the property, and that she will effectively end up being able to take back. So the whole concept, you're at, so although you're right to raise the issue, that the response that Abaye made to Rav Yosef was designed to try to address that. I agree with you that it's very complicated. So my apologies if it's not completely clear. But that's what Abaye's response is specifically coming to address your comment.
But the initial discussion was where the woman died, right? So the woman,
correct.
So the question was whether the husband has the right to the property, the nixay maluk, for instance. But
correct.
But the
Mishnah was about where the father created a nixay maluk situation. The father is like the husband in the Mishnah, because he has the rights to the fruit, and the son is like the wife in the situation, because the son has the rights to the underlying property. It's as if he's holding nixay maluk, and so that's why we have a good analogy. But then we undermine the analogy based on Takanas Usha, that Takanas Usha said we don't want wives to effectively sell their nixay malog during the lives of their husbands, because it effectively undermines the husband's ownership and rights to be able to have the property. And so as a result, in that unique situation, we're not going to allow wives to sell the nixay malog, and so we won't allow the Rav Shmuel bar Abba's mother to transfer the nixay malog to her son if she dies first. And if she dies first, it's going to go back to the husband. But in the case of our Mishnah, we don't have that takana. And we would say that according to Reish Lakish, we would allow the sale of the property by the son, because ownership of the underlying property is what matters, and what owning the fruit is not as important, according to Reish Lakish.
But could she ever transfer the property to her son? She can sell, right, the nixay malog, because it's not the nixay malog. She could sell the underlying property because it's hers. But when does the son inherit the mother? The son normally inherits the father.
You're absolutely right. But the case of our that we began with, right, it's the mother of Rav Shmuel bar Abba transferred the property to her son. And in general, we're going to assume that any kind of transfer is effectively like a sale, and will give the recipient the same rights as a purchaser. So we definitely are ignoring the difference between the mother writing the property to the son, and again, I guess, and the son and the father writing a property to the son. In both cases, we're saying that that transfer is like a valid sale, and each Rav Shmuel and the son in the case, and the son who we called Sam in the case of Frank writing the property over to his son. So there as well, they both have the exact same rights. The father or husband has the rights to the fruit, and the son has the rights to the underlying property. The difference is that in the end of our discussion, the difference is that because it was the wife who transferred it to the son Rav Shmuel, we're not going to make that a valid transfer, because we have Takanas Usha, and we're going to say that if the wife dies first, the husband gets the property back. On the other hand, when you have the case of the father writing the son the property rights, will allow the son's sale of the property to be a valid sale, because we don't have Takanas Usha applying in that situation.
So that father's able to transfer the property to the son while the father and the son are both alive. It would seem that the son doesn't have rights to the property until the father dies. How can he sell property that effectively is not his?
No, that's the key. The key is, if we take a look at the second line in Rashi, he's selling him the property from today. He's transferring the underlying property. The underlying property is being transferred. What he's retaining is only the rights to the fruit. It's as if he's making it into nichse malog. That's the whole point. That's why this is an analogous case, and that's why Rabbi Yirmiyah thought that this Mishnah was on all fours with the case of his, stepbrother or half brother, Rav Shmuel Bar Abba. He thought that this was a perfect example, and so as a result, he felt that Rav Shmuel should be able to keep the property. But then because of Takanas Usha, which only came in at the very end, then we're going to say, no, that case is unique. Father transferring to son, that will be a valid situation, and the son will be able to sell it. Whereas when a mother has a nifse malog, which is similar in the property rights between that father and son, it's similar, but we're going to say that because of Takanas Usha, the husband, if the wife predeceases him, is going to be able to recollect it. So we'll end there. Again, wish you a fabulous, fabulous
It's complicated.
It is. It is. This was one of the tougher dapim to prepare. So happy to go over it again, God willing, as we pick up tomorrow. We'll do a little bit of chazara, and looking forward to picking up tomorrow. Tomorrow it will be a shorter day because they need this room at 8:30. So we'll be finishing at exactly 8:30, and God willing, we'll start at exactly 7:45. Have a great day, everybody.